quiet town, shadowed by an ancient family secret, an outsider's innocent act unleashes an unspeakable horror. The Graham family, bound for generations to a monstrous legacy lurking in their cellar, faces their darkest fear as the curse of their bloodline erupts into chaos. As the town succumbs to a terrifying transformation, becoming ground zero for a global apocalypse, the world teeters on the brink of a new, feral era. This is a tale of a curse unbound, a family's legacy turned nightmare, and a world conquered by the age of the beast. Can anything or anyone stop the relentless spread of the Lycan curse? Dive into the heart of darkness in this gripping story of survival, legacy, and the indomitable nature of fear. Chapter 1. The Beast Below. The Graham family's old manor, perched on the outskirts of a sleepy town, had always been the subject of whispered rumors, but within its aging walls, a secret far darker than mere gossip lay hidden. On this stormy night, as lightning cleaved the sky, the heavy rain muffled the sounds from below the house. In the dank, shadow-draped cellar, an ancient chain rattled eerily. The darkness was almost absolute, broken only by the occasional flicker of a distant storm, revealing glimpses of something sinister. There, bound by heavy iron chains, was a creature of nightmares, a werewolf, its once human features twisted into a grotesque mask of feral rage. Its eyes, glowing faintly in the dark, were filled with an unquenchable fire of hatred and hunger. With each thunderclap, it lunged violently, the chain straining against the brute force of the beast, echoing through the cellar like the bell of doom. Its growls were low and guttural, a sound born of centuries of confinement and fury. Above, in the house's cozy parlor, the Graham family gathered in a circle. Their heads were bowed, hands clasped tightly as they recited their nightly prayer. The ritual was as old as the curse itself, passed down through generations. Each word, murmured in unison, was a plea for protection, a chant to keep the darkness at bay. The room was filled with portraits of their ancestors, each face etched with the same solemn burden. The current generation of Grahams: John, the stern patriarch; Eliza, his devout wife, and their 2 children, young Ethan and curious Alice, all bore the weight of their lineage, a lineage marred by a chilling legacy, the beast that dwelled beneath their feet. As the prayer reached its crescendo, a loud clatter erupted from below, causing the family to pause, their hearts skipping a beat. It was a sound they had grown accustomed to, yet it never failed to instill a sense of dread. John's eyes met Eliza's, an unspoken understanding passing between them. The curse of their ancestor, a spectre from a bygone era, remained ever present, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked within their own blood. Outside, unbeknownst to the Grahams, a lone figure approached the manor, seeking refuge from the storm. This stranger, Tom, would soon unwittingly set into motion a chain of events that would unearth long-buried secrets and challenge the very foundation of the Grahams' existence. As the storm raged on, the boundaries between past and present, human and beast, began to blur, and the Graham family found themselves on the precipice of a terror that had been brewing for centuries. Chapter 2. The legacy passed down. The clock in the Graham family's old parlor chimed, its sound echoing through the corridors of the house, a constant reminder of the passing of time. But in this home, time held a different meaning. It was both a guardian and a menace. John, as a boy of 10, remembered one such evening distinctly. The rain was tapping gently against the window pane as he sat in the study with his father, Edward Graham. The room was filled with the scent of old books and the smouldering embers of the fireplace. It was there that Edward decided to unveil the heavy mantle of their family's legacy to young John. His father's voice was steady, but laced with an undercurrent of something John could not quite understand then. Perhaps it was fear, or maybe sorrow. "John," his father had begun, "you are old enough now to understand the truth about our family. The secret we guard is not just a matter of tradition, it is a matter of survival." He told John of their ancestor, a man of noble stature and good heart, who had fallen prey to a terrible curse. In the 1800s, transformed into a werewolf, he became a creature of the night, driven by primal instincts. "This beast in our cellar, your great-great-great-grandfather, is beyond redemption," Edward had said, his eyes reflecting the flames from the hearth. "He is driven by an insatiable hunger, a desire to hunt and kill. We cannot reason with him, for he thinks not as a man, but as a feral wolf." Edward had taken a deep breath before continuing. "We are the keepers of this curse, John. The chains and our prayers are all that keep the beast at bay. Should he ever break free, he will be an unstoppable force of evil and destruction. Each person he bites will become like him, a slave to the curse of the Lycan, spreading the affliction far." John remembered feeling a cold shiver run down his spine as his father spoke. The weight of responsibility had suddenly felt very real, very heavy. "There is no cure for this curse," Edward had concluded. "Our family has tried for generations. We can only hope to contain it, to prevent the darkness from spreading." As John sat there, listening to his father, the shadows of the study seemed to grow longer, darker. The gravity of his inheritance had settled on his young shoulders that night, an inheritance of eternal vigilance against a horror that lay chained in their own home. Years had passed since that night, and John had grown into the role of the family's protector, but the words of his father lingered in his mind like an unending echo. "There is no stopping the beast, only the hope of holding it at bay." Chapter 3. The Uninvited Guest. On that fateful night, as the storm raged outside, casting the Graham family's manor in a silhouette of foreboding shadows, there came a knock at the door. It was an unexpected sound that cut through the howling wind and the family's evening prayers. John, cautious and wary, opened the door to find a stranger standing in the downpour. The man, soaked to the bone, introduced himself as Tom, a traveller caught unawares by the violent storm. He pleaded for shelter, his eyes begging for compassion. But John, bound by the unspeakable secret they harboured, could not risk a stranger's presence. "You are not welcome here," he stated firmly, his voice barely concealing the fear of what lay beneath their home. With those cold words, he shut the door in the stranger's face, leaving Tom to the mercy of the storm. Rejected and desperate, Tom scanned the manor's grounds for any form of refuge. Ignoring the private property and keep-out signs, he scaled a high wall and a fence, finally stumbling upon an old tool shed. It was far from comfortable, but it would have to do until the storm subsided. As Tom settled in, trying to shake off the cold, he heard an odd sound. At first, it seemed like chanting, distant and almost melodic. Then came the unsettling noise of chains and a deep, guttural growling. Tom's heart raced. It sounded like a dog in distress. Driven by concern and curiosity, he ventured closer to the source of the sounds. He found a small opening, a narrow window that peered into what looked like a cellar. It wasn't big enough for him to climb through, but he could see inside. The rattling of chains and the growling grew louder. "You there, boy?" Tom called out, mistaking the sounds for a trapped animal. As he reached his hand inside, hoping to offer some solace to what he thought was a dog, the noises intensified. Suddenly, there was a sound like chains being violently pulled, as if an animal were trying to break free. "Come on, boy. I'll get you out," Tom said, his voice a mix of worry and determination. Without warning, a chain snapped. Something from the darkness latched onto Tom's arm. He yanked his hand back in reflex, feeling the sharp pain of teeth puncturing his skin. "Ah, stay in there then," Tom exclaimed, a mix of anger and shock in his voice. As he staggered back into the storm, nursing his wound, he was unaware of the gravity of what had just transpired. The bite, seemingly superficial, was more than just an injury. It was the awakening of an ancient curse. As he wandered off into the night, the true horror of what lay within the Graham family's cellar remained unseen. But now it had made its first contact with the outside world. Chapter 4. The Beast Awakens. Hours after the harrowing encounter at the Graham Manor, Tom, still a stranger to the small town, found his way to a local cafe. The storm had subsided, leaving behind a palpable sense of unease. As he entered, his appearance drew immediate attention. His arm was bleeding, the wound appearing far from normal. "What happened?" asked a concerned patron, eyeing the injury with a mix of curiosity and worry. "Damn dog bit me," Tom grumbled, his voice rough and strained. He slumped onto a chair, his exhaustion palpable. "Give me a coffee," he demanded more than requested. The woman behind the counter obliged, her brows knitted in concern. "Here, put this bandage on it," she said, offering him a first aid kit. Tom sat motionless for a while, his coffee untouched, his head resting on his arm. The staff exchanged worried glances. One of them gently nudged him. "You okay, mister?" "Just so tired," Tom mumbled, his voice barely audible. In the background, the owner of the cafe began to restock the fridge with fresh supplies, including raw meat. At the sight and smell of it, something primal stirred within Tom. His senses heightened unnaturally, fixated on the meat. Without warning, Tom leapt over the counter, pushing the owner aside with alarming strength. He began to consume the raw meat with a wild, animalistic fervor. The sight was shocking, his actions incomprehensible. "Call the police!" shouted the owner, trying to pull Tom away. But Tom turned, snarling, a wild look in his eyes that was inhuman, feral. Soon after, the police arrived. They shouted at Tom to back away and lay down, but he was oblivious to their commands. As one officer approached, Tom's face contorted into a mask of bestial rage. He lunged at the officer, biting him viciously on the arm. The other officer, in a panic and self-defense, opened fire. Tom collapsed to the floor, his body going still. "He bit me," exclaimed the bitten officer, clutching his arm in pain and shock. An ambulance arrived promptly, whisking away Tom's body and the injured officer, who was already en route to the hospital for urgent treatment. Little did they know, the incident at the cafe was just the beginning. The curse that the Grahams had fought so hard to contain was now unleashed, its effects starting to ripple through the town in a way no one could have anticipated. Chapter 5. The Curse Unleashed. The night in the small town descended into chaos, a terror unleashed that was beyond anyone's worst nightmares. As the ambulance personnel loaded what they believed to be Tom's lifeless body into their vehicle, a sudden, unsettling movement caught their attention. "Is that normal?" one of the paramedics asked, a note of fear in his voice as he observed the body beginning to twitch and spasm under the cover. Before either could react, a horrific transformation occurred. The body mass visibly grew, morphing into something grotesque and unnatural. In a terrifying moment, the cover was violently thrown off, revealing not the man they had loaded, but a monstrous werewolf. With features of a wolf, but standing on two legs, the beast, in a fit of pure rage, leapt at the nearest ambulance worker, biting and clawing in a frenzied assault. The second paramedic suffered the same fate before the creature darted off into the night, its howl echoing ominously throughout the town. Shocked shop owners and bystanders came out to witness the commotion, only to be greeted by a scene of blood-curdling carnage. The two bodies of the ambulance workers lay motionless in pools of blood. Then, to the horror of the onlookers, the bodies began twitching. Muscles spasmed and contorted as the two men underwent a grotesque transformation, rising up as feral, raging werewolves. Panic ensued as the shop owners screamed, desperately trying to lock themselves in their establishments, but their efforts were in vain as the newly turned werewolves smashed through doors and windows, assaulting anyone in their path with ruthless savagery. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the officer who had been bitten by Tom in the cafe was undergoing a similar horrifying metamorphosis. In the emergency room, amidst the hustle and bustle of medical staff, the officer's body convulsed uncontrollably. As the staff tried to restrain him, thinking it to be a seizure, the transformation completed. He stood, now a monstrous werewolf, eyes glinting with primal fury. The hospital erupted into screams and chaos as the werewolf launched itself at the unsuspecting medical personnel and patients. Security guards and police, called to the scene, were met with a creature of nightmares, far beyond their training or understanding. Back in the town, the night was filled with howls and screams, a symphony of terror. The curse that the Graham family had contained for generations had broken free, multiplying and spreading like wildfire. The town was now facing an epidemic of lycanthropy, a disaster they were wholly unprepared for. As the night progressed, the situation grew more dire, with no apparent solution in sight, and the full moon watching over the town like a silent, ominous witness to the unfolding horror. Chapter 6. Desperate measures. In a matter of days, the once peaceful town had transformed into a nightmarish epicenter of lycanthropy. The rapid spread of the curse left the authorities with no choice but to call in the military. A perimeter was swiftly established around the town, a formidable barrier against the Lycan outbreak. Tanks, heavy machine guns, and the latest in military technology formed an impenetrable line of defense. General Williams, in charge of the operation, surveyed the scene with a grim expression. If just one of these creatures gets out, the entire country is doomed, he stated gravely to his aides. His voice carried the weight of the dire situation, each word underscored by the seriousness of their task. As they strategized, a bone-chilling howl cut through the air. Two lycans, their eyes glowing with feral intensity, charged at the perimeter. The soldiers responded immediately, unleashing a barrage of heavy gunfire. The creatures were hit repeatedly, sustaining extreme injuries, but to the shock of everyone watching, they soon rose again, retreating back into the town with a resilience that defied logic. General Williams turned to his team, his face hardening. "We are pursuing the idea of using nukes," he said, a hint of reluctance in his voice. The very thought of such an extreme measure was a testament to their desperation. "Conventional weapons don't seem to have any lasting effect on them." He looked out over the desolate town, now a battleground between humanity and a curse centuries old. "I think we can contain them for now," he continued, "but we need a more permanent solution, and fast. This isn't just a fight against monsters, it's a race against time." The grim reality of their situation hung in the air. The military might have been able to hold the perimeter, but the question of how to eliminate the threat without resorting to catastrophic measures remained unanswered. As the general and his team delved into heated discussions, The sounds of howls and gunfire continued to echo in the background, a constant reminder of the battle that raged just beyond the barrier. Chapter 7. The Last Stand at Graham Manor. Within the confines of their ancestral home, the Graham family bore witness to the chaos that had engulfed their town. Their manor, a solitary beacon in the midst of the military-imposed perimeter, stood out as an island of relative calm in a sea of turmoil. As the lycans approached the manor, a primal roar echoed from the cellar. The beast, sensing its kin, clamoured for freedom with a fury that shook the very foundations of the house. But the Grahams, steadfast in their duty, began their ancient prayers, a ritual passed down from father to son. These prayers seemed to create an invisible barrier, repelling the encroaching lycans. Somewhere, it spread, John murmured, his voice a mix of disbelief and dread. All we can do is stay here and protect the beast. If he escapes, no one out there will stand a chance. Outside, the sound of gunfire grew closer, signaling the approach of the military. Through a window, John saw armed forces converging on their manor. It became evident that they had noticed something peculiar, the Lycan's inability to cross onto the Graham property. A short while later, a knock sounded at the door, more assertive than any visitor before. John cautiously opened it to find a captain and a team of 6 soldiers. They entered quickly, securing the door behind them. One of them radioed in, "We're here." The captain, eyeing the Graham family, asked bluntly, "What's your story?" "You need to leave. This is private property," John replied, his tone firm yet laced with an underlying urgency. "I don't think so," the captain countered, his gaze piercing. "We've observed the lycans. They're being repelled from your manor, and we need answers." The tension in the room escalated as 2 worlds collided. The military, desperate for a solution to a crisis beyond their understanding, and the Graham family, guardians of a centuries-old curse. John knew that the secrets of the Graham Manor were now on the verge of being exposed. Whether this revelation would bring salvation or further damnation was a question that hung heavily in the air, as the howls of the lycans outside mingled with the steady rhythm of military discipline. Chapter 8. The Unleashing. The howl that resonated from the basement of the Graham Manor was unlike anything the military team had ever heard. It was a sound that seemed to embody pure, unadulterated menace. "What's that noise?" the captain demanded, his hand instinctively resting on his weapon. "That," John said with a gravitas that silenced the room, "is mankind's doom. If you venture down there, you will unleash a prophecy of man's end. The lycans outside are mere shadows compared to the beast in the cellar. It cannot be stopped, only subdued." The captain, skeptical yet intrigued, made a decision. "We'll take a look." John positioned himself defiantly in front of the cellar door. "My sworn duty is to keep it locked away, even if it costs my life. There will be no life if it escapes." But the military team, driven by urgency and desperation, pushed him aside aggressively. The Graham family, realizing their pleas were in vain, began to form a circle, chanting their ancient prayers with renewed fervor. As the team descended into the basement, the distant sounds of gunfire and howls filtered through the air, a chaotic symphony of the battle raging outside. The basement was dark, an abyss that seemed to swallow all light. As they opened the heavily bolted door, they peered into the gloom. There, in the shadows, they could just make out a figure. The beast, a nightmare made flesh. Upstairs, the Graham family continued their chant, a desperate plea for containment, but their voices faltered as they heard gunfire and screams emanating from below, followed by a haunting silence. Then came the sound of heavy footsteps ascending the basement stairs. The family's chant grew more intense, a futile effort to ward off the inevitable. They watched, hearts pounding in terror, as the creature, now free from its chains, walked past them, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. The beast paused for a moment, as if acknowledging the futile efforts of the family before exiting the house into the night. The Graham Manor, once a stronghold against the curse, had fallen. The ultimate horror, the source of the curse, was now unleashed upon the world. The family's chants faded into a mournful whisper, their legacy shattered. The night air was filled with the sound of howls, a chorus of the damned, as the creature merged with its kin, leading an army of nightmares into the darkness. Chapter 9. The Fall of the Perimeter. At the military's fortified blockade, General Williams and his troops braced themselves for another assault. The air was tense, heavy with anticipation and fear. Soldiers manned their posts, weapons at the ready, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the lycans. "There they come again," General Williams muttered, his voice betraying a hint of fatigue from the relentless attacks. But this time, something was different. Among the approaching lycans, a massive figure stood out, dwarfing its kin in both size and aura of menace. "Look at the size of that one," the general exclaimed, a sense of dread settling in. The soldiers trained their weapons on the approaching horde, focusing on the colossal beast leading the pack. As they opened fire, a chilling realization dawned on them. Their bullets, which had at least slowed down the other lycans, seemed to have no effect on this behemoth. It kept moving forward, an unstoppable force of nature, as if each bullet was nothing more than a nuisance. Behind the beast, hundreds of townsfolk turned lycans followed, a horrifying testament to the curse's rapid spread. The soldiers' fire did little to stem the tide, as the lycans, emboldened by the presence of their formidable leader, surged forward with renewed ferocity. The beast reached the barrier, and with a display of brute strength, began to tear through the defenses as if they were made of paper. Soldiers, caught off guard by the sheer power of the creature, were overwhelmed in moments. The screams of the fallen filled the air as they, too, began to transform into the very monsters they had fought against. At military headquarters, far from the chaos, officers listened in horror over the radio. General Williams's voice, once steady and commanding, was now filled with terror and desperation. "They've broken through," he screamed, the sound of destruction and mayhem echoing through the transmission. The line went dead, leaving the room in stunned silence. The last bastion of defense had fallen, and with it, any semblance of hope they had of containing the outbreak. The curse, that had been a dark secret of the Graham family for centuries, was now a catastrophe on a scale never before seen, a nightmare unleashed upon the world. Chapter 10. The Age of the Beast. 3 months following the catastrophic breach at the military perimeter, the world had undergone a transformation so profound and terrifying that it was unrecognizable. The Lycan curse, unleashed from the depths of the Graham family's cellar, had spread with an alarming speed and ferocity, engulfing cities, towns and villages across the globe. Human civilization, as it had been known, ceased to exist. The relentless spread of the Lycans left no corner of the world untouched. Major cities, once bustling hubs of activity, lay in ruins, their skylines shattered, streets abandoned. The night was filled with the haunting howls of the Lycans, a constant reminder of the new rulers of the planet. Society had crumbled under the onslaught. Governments and military forces, overwhelmed and outmatched, fell one after the other. Attempts at creating safe havens or developing a cure were futile, crushed under the overwhelming numbers of the Lycans. Human survivors were few, scattered across the globe, hiding in remote areas, always on the move to avoid detection. The world had entered a new era, the age of the beast. The lycans, now the dominant species, roamed the lands freely. The curse had bonded them into packs, creating a new, brutal social order. The nights belonged to them, filled with their hunts and howls, echoing in the eerie silence of the abandoned human world. Nature began to reclaim what was once hers. Forests grew over crumbled buildings. Wild animals returned to the places once inhabited by humans, and the skies cleared of pollution. In a dark, twisted way, the planet was healing, returning to a state untouched by human hands. Humanity's legacy was reduced to whispers in the wind, echoes of a once thriving civilization now lost. The Graham family's curse had not only destroyed their lineage, but had rewritten the course of history, plunging the world into a primordial darkness where only the strongest, the lycans, survived. In this new age under the rule of the beast, the earth had grown wild and untamed, a stark reminder of the fragility of human existence and the destructive power of ancient curses left unchecked. Thank you for joining me on this chilling journey. If your thirst for the unknown and the unexplained is still unquenched, I invite you to delve deeper into the abyss of terror. Just beyond the veil of reality, another story awaits to send shivers down your spine. Dare to join me in the next video, where the unknown becomes known and the unseen seen. Until then, keep the lights dim and your mind open. This is Professor Shadow, signing off.